got the thumbs up. Welcome to the very last class in MGO302. Now today, as we actually had been remarking for a while, today is a free day, so to speak. There's nothing new in this video if you're binge watching, trying to catch up with material. We finished on Tuesday. But what is it? I call it a junk drawer day. Remember that in a junk drawer, you have a lot of different things which each one of them actually might be quite valuable. We just generally call it a junk drawer if it's a drawer that we've tossed several different things into and there's no particular organization scheme. Oh, all right. So we've been collecting up things that are essentially, in a certain sense, not that they're not valuable, but not totally essential to finishing your notes, and saving them for today, right, because about half of the class here in Buffalo is taking the exam tomorrow. Oh, all right, so that, I just drew that up really fast. Here's an agenda. The way that the agenda will work, since this day, unlike any other day in MGO302, remember I said at the beginning of the semester that the first day of the semester and the last day of the semester weren't really going to be anything like everything else in between. First day of the semester we talked mostly about syllabus. This is what I meant. I prepared this. My thoughts are to go all the way down to the bottom of the list. If we don't actually make it, like we run out of time, it doesn't represent any sort of failure. In that sense. One of the things that I did do, since we didn't get a lot of suggestions as to what other people would like to see reviewed today, is the things that I then selected. I thought, well, you know, probably the most valuable thing would be to back up and do something repetitive in the early chapters, because that's the ones that's like farthest in time. Those are the ones you were reviewing for the 5th EQS, not the 6th EQS. Those are the two largest chapters. All right, so up at the top it says exam study guidelines. Right, exam study guidelines for exam 3 have been available for a while, but let's stop and take a look at them. First off, information. Oh, in Buffalo, it says info for May 12th, right? A lot of people are taking it tomorrow versus when the UB Central scheduling system scheduled you on Monday, May 15th. Now, if you are taking it on Monday, no worries. That's the breakdown here in Buffalo for exam rooms. If you are taking it tomorrow, we'd been talking for a while because I was so proud of myself that we'd be over in Knox 20. Or, well, wait, there's more. Alfiero 102. One thing I want to point out before we go any further is literally minutes ago, I posted the seating assignments for this upcoming early exam. Now, I know that half of you that don't care about this. It's fine. Just take a little bit of a micro nap. What it is it's a spreadsheet. And what it says is most everybody, you're going to be, if you're planning to take it Friday here in Buffalo, you're going to be in Knox 20. Okay, please, though, today, before the exam, sometime tomorrow, I'm speaking in real time, find your name. One of the reasons is not to simply find your seating assignment, but also if you don't find your name here, what it says is, notice that there's 2 tabs on this. That then your name, if you have a reservation, should be over here. You might be in Alfiero 102, okay? So everybody, do us that favor and check for yourself online, confirm which room, and this is if you're planning to take it on Friday, which room that you're in. There's only like 40 people in Alfiero 102, but it would be handy to know that in advance. Okay, now back to the paper document. In Singapore, you guys are all set. General information for everybody. The structure of the exam, yeah, these were the 2 largest chapters, so you probably noticed that they're the largest sender of questions. Although, you know that chapter that we were talking about most recently, that one's a big sender of vocabulary to the super multiple choice sheet that's been out for a while. This stuff, all right. What's it say here? A lot of this in here is the same copy-paste as from other guidelines. What to expect on exam day, preparation advice, except detailed advice, or what is actually new on the exam. First off, what is actually new, detailed advice, and the formula sheet. First, let's look at the detailed advice. So I'm paging through all my sincere recommendations for how I would prepare for the exam. This is page 5. Detailed advice, notice this, much longer than it was for the other two exams. So there's a variety of things here. We didn't go over EOQ with price breaks. So there is a range out of Chapter 10. Nope, it's not on the exam. Also notice that when you're practicing, practice problems that refer specifically to price breaks. So, it's not a terribly efficient use of your time to practice those particular problems. We had mentioned this in class. If you have to determine a reorder point, right, you'll have information about demand during lead time. That means that you don't need to know how to derive demand during lead time, which knocks another page range out of Chapter 10. You will not be required to calculate the process capability index. That was another quantitative thing from Chapter 13, so it's just on that one particular page, but then these problems all refer to that. You're also not required to calculate control limits on C charts or average outgoing quality from Chapter 13. Those are all other variations on the theme that we were setting up with the X bar chart with known variation, the X bar and R chart with unknown variation, and the P chart. So this effectively knocks that range out of Chapter 13, and then note the back of chapter problems that refer to that. You'll be not required to calculate or use the critical ratio rule, although notice that it is on the super multiple choice that was released like almost 3 weeks ago. That's the only incidence of it. It is just the ratio of time remaining to work remaining. But since we skipped that page due to our snow day, just to tighten things up, then those particular problems drop out. There's no third exam question specifically on disaster logistics, which starts on page 479 and finishes out that last chapter. It's actually a topic that's very important to me, but nope, actually I did not write any questions on that. Should there be an MRP problem requiring records, blank MRP records will be used. They'll be of this type. I printed this off from, this page is still hanging there in the EQS section. I set it up so that it would stay around for the rest of the semester in case you were working other MRP problems and you didn't want to actually draw those tables. What else? If you need either format of Z-table, it will be required, obviously. And if you need a table such as figure 13.10, what was that? That was the table, chapter 13, that we got remember the A2 factor and the D3 and the D4 factor? We looked up the sample size. Yeah. Obviously, you're not going to memorize all of those values, so that would be there. Okay, so this is specific to the third exam. Now we're back to general descriptions that are the same as the first two, which brings us to, here's the formula sheet. You've probably already looked at it by now, but let's just take a little bit of a tour because we might use part of it today. Let me think. This right here would be Chapter 10. I notice ROP for a reorder point. And then I notice the order size formula and the total cost formula that can be used for any order size, not just the perfect one, in the case of the plain old EOQ, and then in the case of the EOQ, the economic production quantity, that case where you actually produce this stuff. How is it that you're supposed to know the difference between these two? We had mentioned you can't use the second model unless they tell you something about how fast it's produced. That's the giveaway. This, following it next, is all from, let's see, that's Chapter 11 right here, inventory calculations. This then is chapter 12, because that's the Kanban card formula. And we just remember the D and L have to agree with each other. This Z value just sort of never goes away. We were using Z values in essence in two different chapters. I will talk about that more in general a little bit later. This is chapter 13, because UCL means upper control limit, LCL means lower control limit. The deal with control charts is if you're actually the designer of them is setting the limits. These were the formulas for P chart, see the P, for known variation, right? That's where you have the standard deviation versus unknown variation. That's where you need the table. Critical ratio, I set this formula sheet up a while ago and released the data, but then we decided to drop that in class, so actually you don't need that. Although kind of handy, that's sort of spelling out the definition of critical ratio, and isn't it on the super multiple choice sheet? It will be there. Flow time, that's from chapter 14. And then these are all reminders from chapter 15. How do you calculate expected value? You've been doing that over and over again in other classes, but you basically create one value by adding up the probability times the outcome in each case. The reliability of the system, you just multiply the individual reliabilities together, and the reliability of a redundant set, okay, you have to be a little bit more careful piecing that together, but you basically put the reliability in here and the reliability in there, and carry out the rest of the arithmetic. So that's chapter 15. Any questions on that so far? Okay. General advice in preparing for the third exam is actually my same advice for preparing for any of the first two. If I could give one piece of advice, it was actually true for the first two exams. It's true for the third exam. If you are trying to get ready to do some type of analysis, like you're working on a control chart problem or you're working on an MRP problem, remember my advice. The most effective use of your time is tackle a problem cold. You try to do it yourself. You say, yeah, but I don't know how to do it. I'll just get stuck. That's perfect. That's what you want to do in order to do really well in an exam. Is first you want to it's kind of like working out in the gym. You want to stress yourself by getting stuck, then find out why you were stuck. Either come to office hours, or some people are using Note Shaper. Start the video and find out why you were stuck. That is building knowledge in your mind, and it means it won't happen on the exam. Okay, why am I saying this? Because there is a tendency with some people, is they say, I did all the problems. No, I didn't do very well. They watched all the Note Shaper videos, and I cringe. Because it's like watching an incredibly uninteresting TV series on Netflix. I mean, it's not a total waste of time, but it's not ineffective, considering the amount of time in it. It's not an effective use of your time. Better to do the problem first. If you can get the answer, you don't need any video or any help from me. If you can't get the answer, then go find out why you couldn't get the answer. That's how you get better, and that's how you work problems correctly than more problems that you've never seen before on the exam. So anyway, a little bit of uninvited advice. Now, what then if we are done with the guidelines? Oh, yes, something else that's been available for a little while already on UB Learns. Let's take a look at the FWR Fine Wine Rack validation quiz. I've got here a copy of the demo quiz. Also available online, I printed this out, is the full question bank. Just like last time, there is kind of a little analysis problem, of which there's several different versions of it, but all the versions are in here. And then there's a bank of problems concerning what's impossible. Let's take a look at this. All right, so if we were doing this quiz, Let me get a marker. I would, oh, can't even spell my name. Remember to fill out the top. Let's take a look at this, the first part. Why don't I zoom in a little bit? Okay, so each and every quiz opens with this little paragraph that's going to say something about horizontal pieces can be produced at a rate of 200 per hour. Carpenter uses 500 and then 22, right? Making blah, da, 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 da. You know what this is about? You know what the sort of the central principle of the fine wine rack was that tied in to chapter 11 in the book? It's all about ending inventory. It's all about inventory, or actually what we say in general, inventory position. This is a problem about ending inventory, because that's actually what you were worried about as you tried to piece together your fine wine rack schedule. Is hour by hour, what was the ending inventory? Thanks, Kevin. That right there. So, this first scenario concerns horizontal and vertical pieces. I'm just going to write H and V. I would do this for any test under any conditions. I always take paragraphs and I turn them into tables. It helps me then control, actually in a certain sense, it helps me control my thinking. Because if I keep reading over a story, then my mind keeps wandering from one sentence to the next. This is about ending inventory. I can tell because it's telling me all the different parts. All right. The different parts of ending inventory are beginning inventory plus production. Here I'm going to write demand just because for demonstration I'm trying to be consistent with the how it appears right there. But the demand here is dependent demand. It's essentially usage of the part equals ending inventory. Because this is a table. It says, for instance, you have 900 horizontal pieces and 50 vertical pieces in stock right now. That is beginning inventory. So I would say, okay, 900 of those and 50 of these. Production. Okay, horizontal pieces, you can produce them at 200 per labor hour. Of course, it depends how many you're producing. I can jot the 200 here, but how many labor hours did you devote to that? Well, for the next hour, you assign Juan to making racks. Okay, so he's not making horizontal pieces. Debbie to trim making. Okay, so she's not making horizontal pieces. And Mike and Stan to horizontal piece production. That's the number I was looking for. 2 people, 2 hours. All right. What about verticals? Producing verticals. Oh, it doesn't say how fast you produce verticals. Oh, no, I have to memorize that. No, if you looked at the test bank, you're not obligated to remember any particular number or rate. It doesn't say, there's nobody making verticals, so that the production would just be 0. Minus demand, right. Carpenters use horizontal pieces a lot faster than any single person produces them. You found that out pretty fast, right? So if Juan is making racks, then 500 would be used. 22 verticals would be used. So the ending inventory is what? Would have 800 by the end of that hour, right? 900 plus 400 new ones minus 500 would be 800, and then just 50 minus 22. What it would have knocked the vertical stock down to 28. This is essentially here what you need to answer any of these questions that could be pulled at random. At the end of the next hour, you have 48 verticals in stock. No, we don't. False. A total of 400 new horizontal pieces would have been produced in the next hour. Yeah, 200 times 2, that's 400. That's true. And at the end of the next hour, you will have 1,300 horizontal pieces in stock. At the end of the next hour, we just determined you would have 800 horizontal pieces in stock. That's false. Now, you have every possible question. The one that's in the demo is actually the second one in the question bank. This is the one that was copied into the demo, because there's several that could be pulled at random, but notice they are all simply variations on the same exercise. It's just somewhat different numbers to put in the table. You see there how there is less horizontal pieces at the beginning, and here how there are different numbers of people devoted to horizontal piece production. I highly encourage you to just take a little bit of time to work each of these. Why? Well, it's not really an issue if you want to pass this quiz. Don't you want 2 more points? The thank you points for simply getting all 10 questions correct. They're all there, right? Plus, ending inventory, chances are, since that's in aggregate planning and in MRP, it's kind of good practice just in general then for those elements of the main test itself. Okay, now, that's the first section. The second section, error messages. If I was working this, I would write, I agree, I disagree, or agree, disagree, or happy face, frowny face. Because these are true-false questions, but in this context, that's essentially in responding true-false what you're saying. For instance, it's impossible to allow Juan to be idle for an hour. Do I agree? Like if I was working the fine wine rack? And I go, no, I think I actually had a couple hours at the end of Friday I didn't use. I don't agree. It is impossible to make trim for a job and inspect that job during the same hour. That is true. I agree. It's impossible for Debbie and Stan to do inspection. You know, there's something else I agree with. That's true. So, these statements, you're saying, oh, I've got to go back and memorize the whole story of the fine wine rack. No, not if you look at the question pool. There are going to be 7 of them just pulled from these. There's their answers. More so than memorizing the individual ones, what I am suggesting is refresh your memory concerning certain conditions that you had to deal with that are listed under the memory refresh hints. For example, up here at the top, there's a whole bunch of different true-false statements, and they're all false because they're all about 2 or more people making parts. And the thing that we remember about the fine wine rack is, boy, you needed a lot of parts to make racks. Nothing interferes with making parts. There was nothing that could create an error message if you put a 3 or 4 in there, right? So those are all automatically false. Here's a couple different statements, one of which we were just looking at. It's impossible to allow Juan to be idle for an hour. Other ones are talking about like 2 people or 3 people. There's nothing impossible about being idle. You could leave things blank. All of those, right, are automatically, see that false? All right, now here's some that are true and some that are false. They're based on, oh yes, one thing we did have to remember in the fine wine rack is when you were finishing out the cellars, certainly you needed to make the racks, but there was the custom activities per cellar, trim. First you make trim, then you inspect, then you pack. That's what you might want to refresh your memory on right before the quiz, because all of these are just different ways of asking about that sequence. It is impossible to do any 2 of these within an hour. It's not impossible to necessarily do any 2 of them or all of them within a day, but they do need to be in that order. So all of these questions right here are simply, you might want to jot that down on the quiz just so it's in front of you when you test statements. First trim, then inspect, then pack. And then down at the bottom, we saw something like that just now on the demo quiz. You're like, oh man, I got to remember the different people. I've got to remember that Juan was the one that could do inspection. Actually, no. if you were working with it, you ran up on that problem that only one person, the master carpenter, can do an inspection, so you had to be careful about his time. All of the questions about that are about 2 or more people. They'd have to be false, right? Or excuse me, they're about 2 or more people, they'd have to be true. There we go. True. You don't have to know who the people were. There was only one person who could inspect. So, you might want to refresh your memory on that. So, any questions on that? This is all at the top of the documents area. Okay, yeah, so you've already seen that. You already have that under control. You're going to get the 2 additional points for getting all 10 questions correct. Then, let's check that off the list. Okay, it says quick fine wine rack wrap-up. What's that all about? Oh, speaking of that, should have the scores posted very soon. As I'm talking in real time, if you went to the gradebook, they're still not there. I'm still putting the finishing touches on that. That's the thing about both Native Son and the fine wine rack, is that, yeah, I know that you finished that a little while ago. It's just the way it works structurally. We can't post scores until absolutely everything's investigated and absolutely everybody's score is perfect. Then they all go up. Anyway, hopefully within the next 24 hours. Okay, now, so, wait a minute. Scores aren't up. What's the wrap-up? There is something that's available. I just wanted to point this out if you're curious. Here it is. You can download this spreadsheet right now from the bulletin board area of UB Learns. It is, in hindsight, remember we had a competition? Congratulations to all the point winners. This is everybody's full credit schedule, best full credit schedule ranked. Ultimately, we had, by the deadline, you can see 463 people achieved a full credit schedule by the competition deadline, and then somewhat more people by the actual deadline. If it was by the competition deadline, you would be ranked here out of 463 places. By the way, FYI, the average competition score was about $1,600. But that ranged everything from a negative 6,000 up to the winning over 9,000. Oh, now, what are these other pages? Well, 2 of them are data. It's basically rack data and part data on everybody's full credit schedule because it's being used to, here's a good review for the exam. I know the fine wine rack is over with, but the interesting thing about the fine wine rack is if you want to go hour by hour, you can create sawtooth diagrams, and there's a little bit of a review right from chapter 10. Sawtooth diagrams, line diagrams of inventory level over time. Okay, first off, if you click on this tab here, Sawtooth diagrams, this is what comes up. This is everybody's average inventory levels. The dark line is the rack levels. The lighter line, the pink line marked with squares, is the part level hour by hour throughout the week on average. So that you can see on average we maintain fairly steady levels of both, although, and this is only natural, with the racks, there's some liquidation here right at the very end. Oh, all right, so that's just on average. Now, speaking of chapter 10, speaking of chapter 14, scheduling, job shop scheduling, one of the things that we'd mentioned a couple times is that when you're talking about scheduling, different people have different preferences in putting together a schedule. And you can see that in hindsight from the data from Fine Wine Rack, because we've got almost 500 people's take on what the 4 people in the Fine Wine Rack should do for a week. If you look, you see some starkly contrasting scheduling habits. If you scroll down here, I picked out just 2 extremes. This is just one particular individual's schedule within that pack of full credit schedules. This is a person that prefers stockpiling. Oh, and stockpiling has been like a super multiple choice word actually since like the beginning of the semester. Stockpiling in this context, do you see how they approach the fine wine rack? Remember, the lighter line is part level. A stockpiler looks at the problem and says, okay, there are these finished things that we need to make, but you need parts in order to make the more finished things. So you know what? What I'm going to do first is just make the parts, and I'm going to run up a nice mountain of parts, and that's what you see happening here. And then I'm going to mine that when I've built it up and start building racks. And actually here you can see more the classic just triangular shapes from a sawtooth diagram. Oh, right, because these would be where the dark line drops abruptly. That's a shipment. The rack level dropped because something shipped. It went away. So they, there was something that you had to ship on Thursday. They're shipping here at the beginning of the week, and then most of their shipping is here at the end. So this is a classic. This is one approach, is stockpiling. The thing that's nice about stockpiling is that it is a bit more robust method. We've been using that word in a variety of contexts, meaning that if you run up a high level of parts, you don't have to coordinate the rack making and the part making as tightly, right? Because you're working from a large base. So that's one of the things that's attractive about it. Of course, there would have to be a downside to it, or it would be the only way to do this. The downside to it is the high inventory levels. You can see that in that mountain of parts that's accumulated by the middle of the week. So I picked out one other schedule that exemplifies exactly the opposite approach. This is another person's schedule, and they are very, very much focused on lean operation. I tried to make the scale, here of the two graphs the same. So you can see what's going on here is at any given hour, they have very few parts in stock because the rack making activity in the shipments is distributed evenly across the week. They are trying to run, first off, they're trying to run a lean operation. They are basically making parts and using them very, very quickly. And you can see in lean operation how to get that to work. You try to level, remember that was one of the principles of lean operation. You try to level your schedule. You can see that. Think about what we were just looking at, and that's essentially, look at where the peaks of rack stock is, and then it drops. They're shipping throughout the week so that they have a far more level, essentially, far more level amount of activity throughout the week. They don't have all of the rack making at the end of the week. So, all principles of lean operation. Anyway, you can download this for yourself. You can locate yourself if you're interested then where you might fit into this. You could even edit the spreadsheet by finding yourself under rack level and part level and repurposing. You can see where these graphs are drawing from certain rows, if you would like to. Okay, so that's what I meant by the wrap-up. That'll just stay on the bulletin board until the end of the semester. So we got that done. Oh, and I said, okay, you know what? Continuing on, we might want to do, just why not, a quick Z-table review. Because it's something that everybody could stand to brush up on. And in particular, this exam, we were working in the last couple weeks of the semester with two different formats of Z-table. Let me back this out a little bit. Back out. I thought, you know what? Let's just take a little tour. Because we worked with this one earlier and this one later. You say, oh yeah, they have two different numbers, but does everybody see how they relate to each other? Certainly, if you needed one or the other, you would be provided it, but let me zoom this back in. Whoa. This z-table is just this z-table. Look at this column, except 0.5 has been subtracted from each one of the numbers. That's how the two tables relate. The reason is this z-table, any z-table in any book will tell you across the top in a cartoon, in an illustration, what it is it's actually reporting. This z-table is reporting all of the curve. This z-table, right, this is empty in here. That's the 0.5 that's missing. Now, just a quick review. What was the context for the two different types of tables? All right, so this type we used early in chapter 10, and this type right here we used somewhat later in chapter 13. And actually, this type right here, we had used previously for exam 2, also for project management. Okay, yeah, but that's exam 2, and the exams are not cumulative. So, let's briefly review what the context was. When is it that you liked the table that reported the entire area from Z, where you're cutting a curve, all the way back to the left? So that's why it says across the top from infinity, to Z. All right, that would be ROP, reorder points. We were calculating and we were evaluating reorder points because what did the curve actually represent? It represented demand during lead time. I'm just writing DDLT, demand during lead time. Which we would need during lead time while we wait for the new order to get there. It's something that we're not sure about, so this is supposedly going to represent every possible amount, of which we're confident that there's some average amount. On average, when you wait, right, you need this many. And, but it does vary. Sometimes it's busier, sometimes it's quieter, so there is some standard deviation associated with lead time. Or careful, what might be reported as the variance, and then the standard deviation would just be the square root of that. Yeah. Oh, because what was the context? You were cutting the curve here. That actually was the reorder point. Why is it that we wanted this type of z-table? Because, quick review, everything to the left is every possible outcome that the reorder point would be adequate, right? This is customer demand during lead time. This is every number that's smaller than the reorder point. Fine, we would have enough. Oh, meaning that this was the service level, right? That's actually what was being reported in the table, was what we would call the service level of the reorder point. And then it's not reported in the table. It's 1 minus what's reported in the table. There's this worrisome little bit of the distribution that gets amputated, right? Oh, these are all outcomes where customers might want more than the reorder point. The combined area of that portion of the curve is our stockout risk. It's the chance we won't have enough. It's the chance that demand will exceed supply. Demand will be more than what's on hand during lead time while we wait for the new order. Now, that was all for that style of table. Why do we have two different styles of table? It's actually for your convenience. This was chapter 10. Over here, it's chapter 13, right? In chapter 13, the issue was control charts, of which we were still using a normal distribution. This time, the normal distribution, I'm going to draw it on its side, like you often saw in illustrations in the book. doesn't represent demand during lead time. It represents the natural variation that you might see in samples if you were taking them from a process and the process was in fact healthy and in control. We said, yeah, you know, there's going to be a certain average, like X bar. You know, on average, they're going to weigh about 2 ounces, and but they'll vary. They'll vary even if everything's healthy and in control. And then we drew an upper control limit. We're saying, well, we have to monitor this, and we have to put our foot down. You know, even though they do very naturally, we have to declare an upper control limit. We don't want to see anything heavier than that in the lower control limit. We don't want to see anything smaller than that because that's going to make us suspicious. We're assuming that that's a signable variation. If we pulled a sample and it really was that heavy, it landed up here, or that small and light, it landed down here, that's just too weird, and we're going to stop and we're going to hunt for what the problem is. Right. Oh, yeah, so why did we need a z-table in this context? Well, this distribution represents the natural variation in the sample, meaning that by declaring these limits, again, we did amputate at least a small amount of the natural variation, meaning there's at least a small chance that even when there's nothing wrong, you might get a really weird sample. One might turn out really heavy or really light. Now, in using the chart, you're going to say, stop! We've got to stop. There must be something wrong. And then you're going to be embarrassed because they're going to tear down the machine, and there's not going to be anything wrong with it. And we called that, do you remember, producer's risk? Your risk of being wrong when you declare the process out of control. And in fact, no, that was just a weird sample. Everything's actually fine. Oh, right. And then that had a lot to do with, look at the formulas for actually setting the upper control limit and the lower control limit. The ones for the X bar chart with known variation and the one for the P chart have the Z in it, because the issue is, where do you want to set these? How picky do you want to be? What do you want the producer's risk to be? Oh, well, in order to estimate the producer's risk, do you see, since we cut this mystical normal distribution in 2 places, it's handier to work with just 1/2 of the interior. Then it's actually not helpful to have the entire area to the left of where we cut it reported, because that's not what's going on here. It's been cut once here, and it's been cut once here. And so that's actually what makes this table more convenient. Any questions on that? That I was just saying, just a quick review, especially since that was one of the earliest things we did before this upcoming exam, the reorder point one. That's the distinction between the two. Okay, then that was our super quick review of the 2 different styles of z-table. Let's use our remaining time to, I thought, all right, I'm not no, seriously, I am not telegraphing that there's any certain thing on the exam. You say, all right, well, then what use is this? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not of a lot of use to you, but what I am going to do, though, is I did pick some typical problems from Chapter 10. Remember, we're working on the EOQ and stuff. I thought we'd talk through it. Chapter 11, aggregate planning, and then if we have time, Chapter 11, MRP. We could just talk through them. It's just essentially a review of, right, those were those way back in early April. Those were those first couple of classes. Oh, all right, now, pick a problem. From Chapter 10, I printed it out so that it would lay flat under the Wolf Visualizer. From Chapter 10, I picked Scenario 26 because it's like this bog standard traditional EOQ problem. I thought, right, it's been a while since we've done that. Let's take a look at this one first. Now, one of the things that I would want to have handy for all of this, since I practice for conditions, is the formula sheet. Now, let's take a look at the problem. the demand for a particular part called SKU 005 is 1,500 units a year. I think, oh, wait a minute, the cost of one is this. It costs $60 to place an order. Even if I didn't know that this was in Chapter 10, and there is a per year inventory cost of 25%, combined annual holding costs, minimize combined annual holding costs, I would know that this is Chapter 10. I'm just pointing out, like, you know, what are the triggers if I'm looking at this problem? Because this right here is another way to ask for the EOQ. You know, what was that formula? It was an order size that minimized the combined ordering and holding cost. And I'm just scanning ahead in this problem, and I see language like that. It's asking that. The only thing before going any further is I do need to be alert for, okay, fine. I know I'm like up in here somewhere, but is it this one or is it that one? Okay, well, I should take inventory. Me, the moment I realize it's essentially something from Chapter 10, I want to go collect all the pieces and parts and list them separately. Because it said the demand for a particular part is 1,500 units a year. That is, by definition, capital D, annual demand. That's what capital D always was, how many you needed in a year. Okay, found that. The cost of one of these stock keeping units is 50. All right, that's interesting. From these formulas, I don't have like an exact parameter that's the abbreviation for that. Then I'm thinking, well, that may or may not be something that I actually use in answering this question. I will just note that and hang on to it. This one I recognize. It costs $60 to place an order for SKU 005. It costs $60. It's a fixed cost associated with the order. That is what S is in all of those formulas. The ordering cost. And the user of SKU 005 has a per unit, per year inventory holding cost of 25%. Oh, I think I know where we're going to use this one, the $50, right? Because if this is working its way up to an EOQ problem, I know I need that H. And we have to remember the capital H is the cost of holding 1 unit in inventory for a year. As strange as that sounds, capital H is the cost of holding 1 unit in inventory for a year. And it didn't say that outright in this problem. It said that the inventory holding cost is 25%. The per year inventory is 25%. 25% of what? The unit cost. That's why they told us that. Yeah, sometimes you have to do a little bit of arithmetic for that. So I get that is, wow, it's pretty hefty, right? $12 and 50 cents. Okay, got that. Assume there's 250 working days in a year. Okay, well, I'll note that. We might use that. We definitely have used that. We found out why we were told that. Let's look at the first question. What is the combined annual holding and ordering cost of an order size of 200 units? Now, first off, I had said, well, trying to figure out, should I be here? Should I be here? In this problem, did they say anything about a production rate? How fast this is? No. That automatically makes it here. These are the tools I should be working with. Generally, this one's a special case. Like, you stay alert if you're told anything about the production rate. But if you're not, it's like the default is that you go to the EOQ. Oh, okay. Now, wait a minute. It's asking me for the combined annual ordering and holding costs. Is that this formula right here? No. It's asking for, that's what it sounds like when it's asking for this formula. TC is for total cost, right? Okay, so it's asking for this. Now, I have D, correct? Total cost equals 1,500, just scratch work, divided by Q. So what's the Q? Should we fill out the EOQ? Q is the order size. Q is how much you order. Do you see here? That is also something that was given. One of the things about these two tools, so to speak, is this formula here provides you the optimal order size. It provides you the Q, the amount to order to minimize those two costs. Okay, so it has that one use, but it's a very special use. The second formula, the total cost formula, could be used for any order size. You could put any Q in here, okay? It's not necessarily this one, it just depends what they were asking. In that case, for Part A, they were asking about, we don't have any idea if that's the best order size or not, but that's what they were asking. Okay, so we would fill in a 200. Let's see, what did we have? We had a 60 for S, and then 200 divided by 2, right? Q divided by 2 times, I got to squeeze it in here, 12.5, right? Because that's the H. So I get a total cost of the ordering costs. I'm looking at my scratch work, worked out to $450, and the holding costs worked out to $1,250 for a total cost of $1,700 to answer Part A. That's a 1, and this is a 7. Oh, and speaking of that, I want to point something out. That's a 1, and that's a 7, and 2 zeros. I know for a fact this is not the EOQ. I know for a fact this is not the very best order size, because just a little bit of a review. Do you remember something about the very best order size? I know we're going way back, right, just after the second exam. But the very best order size, the order size that results in the absolute smallest number there, is also the order size that balances the holding and ordering costs. It's just the structure of the problem. We'd noted that. We said that was a good check on your math if you were looking for the absolutely perfect order size and its cost. And I see here that they're way out of balance. So I know that this is not the optimal order size. The answer, though, to report for Part A, because they were asking about Q equals 200, is the 1,700. I know that there is an order size out there that if you do that same arithmetic is going to result in a number that is smaller than this when you put it back in the total cost formula, because I know that this is not the EOQ. Oh, all right. Now, there was other parts to that problem. That was just Part A. Scenario 26 in Chapter 10, it says, oh, right, I was scanning ahead the thing that made me suspicious about what part of the formula sheet. How many of this should be ordered to minimize? This is how you verbalize Q optimal. This little 0 here is actually short for optimal, meaning the very, very best. The one order size that minimizes. Okay, well, let's see. Scratch work. 2 times 1,500, right? That's the D. Times the S is 60 divided by $12.50, because that's the H, the cost of holding 1 unit in inventory for a year. Take the square root of that. I get 120. You can check me on that. Okay, that is the EOQ. That then is the answer to Part B. Right, and that's very different from the 200 that they proposed. They don't ask for it, but if you take this number and you put it back into here, you could calculate the savings, right, because you'll get a number that's smaller than 1,700. Now, Part C. A vendor who sells SKU 005 has just offered a 5% discount of sales on 500 or more. Now how many should be ordered? Oh, right. If we look on the exam study guidelines, page 5, things that are not on the exam for the most part, there is no EOQ with price breaks. You can ignore Part C of Scenario 26. That's a price break problem. Well, it didn't say you could ignore Part D, though. what does this say? Once the purchasing manager for this particular item places an order, the vendor requires 5 working days to deliver that order. What should be the purchasing manager's reorder point, or ROP? Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't say anything about the distribution of demand during lead time. It just makes this very factual statement that you'll always wait 5 working days. And we remember from Chapter 10 that unless we're told otherwise, the underlying assumption is that every day is the same at whatever place you're analyzing. The demand, daily demand is the same. So this is the simplest of all possible reorder point problems. We just need to figure out what 5 days worth of stuff is, right? Because that is, in essence, what you're trying to guess when you set a reorder point, is how much stuff are you going to need before the new order gets there. Trickier when the customer demand varies each day, but if it doesn't, okay, so if you're always going to wait exactly 5 days, then we just need to figure out what 5 days worth of stuff is. That's when you would order. That would keep you covered. Okay, 5 days worth of stuff. Reorder points. Let's see. I know that we need 1,500 over the course of a year, right? Oh, right. Why did they bother to tell us this? There's 250 working days in a year, and the assumption in Chapter 10 is that all of them are exactly the same. I'm just trying to figure out what daily demand is, so I can figure out what 5 days worth of things are. Okay, well, so if you divide the 250 into the 1,500, I get a daily demand of 6 a day. And I should put an arrow there. Demand of 6 a day, because the actual reorder point would be the daily demand times the lead time. It's really just logic, or 6 times, what do they say? You always have to wait 5 working days? You get this number 30. What's that mean? It means that purchasing manager should order when there's 30 of those things left in stock. The reorder point should be 30. Why? Because that'll last 5 days. And then the new order will be here and we'll have more. Any questions on that? Okay. Continuing our whirlwind tour of the early chapters. Let's practice a little bit of aggregate planning. Now, the problem that I brought to class here is scenario 31 in the book. And it does fit all on one page. But one of the things to remember about aggregate planning is very often there's a lot of information. Remember that aggregate planning usually done like for real on spreadsheets because there's generally a lot of information. Although, quick review, all aggregate planning begins with a forecast. So this is something about general foodstuffs, and sure enough, that's the top row of that table. There is a forecast for the sale of something, whatever this is, units of sale. Oh, and interesting. In aggregate planning, like when we were working on it, we started from scratch to develop aggregate plans. This particular problem is actually giving you the plan. Because that's the whole point is, okay, this is what we forecast we're going to need. Now we're going to figure out what we're going to do about it, what we will produce. And in this particular problem, that's already there. Though to be helpful, right, there's a lot of details that then cascade out of the plan. That's why they've left blank areas here in the spreadsheet. For instance, ending inventory. Before we look at any of the rest of this, that's just that same practice from the fine wine rack. Let's see, do they have any in stock right now? Let's see, they can produce 30,000 a month. I guess we'll do something with that. Their plan exceeds in a single month. All are done in overtime. 250 units of sale, 5,000 units of sale available in inventory at the start of month 1. Ooh, important to know. And then there's some certain cost for holding stuff in inventory. Important to know, because if you wanted to fill this out, basically you have 5,000 right now. That's what that's saying. So if this is really what their production plan is, let's see. The ending inventory for month 1 is the beginning inventory. That's, like I said, that's important. That's actually the beginning inventory for month 1. 5,000 plus production, 35,000, minus demand, 25,000. I get that we would be left with 15,000. This is that same logic that we're doing for the fine wine rack, and that actually is embedded in MRP records as well. Okay, so that means that for month 2, you would start out with beginning inventory is the ending inventory of the month before, 1,500, plus they're planning to produce another 40,000. So that's what a total of 55,000. But what they're saying is they're going to ship out 35,000, which means that you would have what then, 20,000 left in inventory. Then you would have this 20,000. Plus, oops, they're not going to produce anything, but they're going to ship out another 15,000, which would knock the ending inventory down to 5,000. You'll have 5,000 in inventory. You'll produce another 10,000. That's 15,000. You'll ship out 5,000. So really that 10,000 may not move. And then, wait a minute, beginning inventory plus production is still 10,000 minus 5,000. The ending inventory for month 5 would be 5,000, and then 5,000 plus 20,000 is 25,000 minus 20,000 get you all be back to that same 5,000. There, that's just, there's the ending inventory. Now, why did I calculate that? Well, first off, I was scanning ahead, and while there's all this other information in here, I noticed that it was asking about inventory. I just did it for the whole thing. To answer part A, I would only have needed to have figured that out through month 3, because there it is, the ending inventory for month 3. You have to start at the beginning to figure out what it would be, but it is 5,000. You can see that. So another little principle here for working problems that have a timeline, like aggregate planning, for instance, or MRP. Then in answering questions about your very careful work, it's always good to stay alert for what time period did they actually ask. Why? Because a good quick place for distractors, credible wrong answers for the person who's writing the exam, is to take the same issue like ending inventory from like the other time periods. Okay? So you just want to hone in on what time period did they ask. That time period, I'm going to go get it from my plan. Okay, yeah, it was 5,000. Now, it says here, what is the average inventory for month 5? So it's asking about right in here. And average inventory is also on the formula sheet. Average inventory is beginning inventory plus ending inventory divided by 2. You're averaging the beginning and the ending inventory. Okay, they are asking about, and that's why I put a highlighter pen around it, so I focus on it. They're asking about month 5. I need to average 2 numbers. This is the ending inventory. This is the beginning inventory. The beginning inventory for a month is the ending inventory of the month before. Those are the two numbers that you average. That's why, for that particular answer, the answer is 7,500. Okay, now, so far these were pretty quick. Logically, what is the total amount that General Foodstuff plans to produce in overtime? Oh, right. There were these other 2 work areas because while they had provided the plan in this problem, they didn't provide the details on how the plan would be implemented. It states down here information that's consistent with what we see. There's an issue of regular time, an issue of overtime. There's nothing else in terms of, right, we called those options. And now I'm just backing up in like a general review of aggregate planning. Remember we said you'd pick a strategy, like did you want level production or did you want to chase demand? Well, somebody's already done that for general foodstuffs. It looks like they're kind of semi-chasing demand here. But then you pick the options, like how are you going to do that? Are you going to work overtime? Are you going to hire extra people? Are you going to rent space? I'm talking about like in general. We talked about these options. If you're working one of these problems, you have to figure out what particular set of options is it that I'm supposed to be manipulating. I can see it's got something to do with regular time and overtime. There's got to be information that's specific to that. In that, how would I figure out what's being done in regular time and what's being done in overtime? I don't even know how many people work here. Except I'm reading and it says General Foodstuffs can produce 30,000 units of sale in regular time. And then there's the cost if it's in regular time. So what that means is that here for regular time, since regular time is less expensive, obviously, than overtime, you would want to look at the plan and do as much as you could in regular time. It's less expensive. I see here that overall production, the plan for month 1 is 35,000. And so we do kind of have a problem here in that it's saying you can produce 30,000 in regular time. I would want to take full advantage of that. That's how I know that regular time production would be 30,000. In month 1, I would use all the regular time hours. You say, yeah, but you still left 5,000 not produced. I got to check on the limits of overtime production. What does it say? When General Foodstuffs plans exceeds 30,000, yeah, the plan definitely exceeds 30,000 there. All units of sale in excess must be produced in overtime. And it doesn't give me any sort of limit here. So I had better schedule the other 5,000. These two have to match that. We're just figuring out, this was determined first, and now we're just figuring out the details of how it will be done. Month 2 is going to be another big month for production, meaning we'll take full advantage of all the regular time hours that are available. But that still means 40,000 minus 30,000. We're going to have to work 10,000 or produce 10,000 units in overtime. Now, wait a minute. Month 3 is super easy. We're taking a vacation. We're not going to do anything. Month 4, the plan is to produce 10,000. So regular time production, fantastic. I can do it all in regular time. But I would only produce 10,000. That's what the plan is. And then you can see same thing here. For month 6, the plan is to produce 20,000. Right. So we would plan on all regular time. I'm just figuring out the details of the implementation. And I have to answer that part 3, because it says, what is the total amount that General Foodstuffs plans to produce in overtime? That's that bottom line. Okay, 15,000, right? Because it's that plus then the rest of it was 0. Okay, so if they're going to do this, then they're going to produce 15,000 units in overtime. Assuming that General Foodstuffs calculates inventory holding costs based on ending inventory levels, what is the total cost of this plan? Let's back up and look at the plan. Yes. This is probably the single most labor-intensive part of aggregate planning, of which this is the aspect of aggregate planning that it's very convenient then to set up as a spreadsheet model. It is calculating the total cost of any given plan, because you'll always have a couple different things going on at a couple different prices, and you have to come up with one invoice, essentially, right, one bill for that. I think about it exactly that way. I think, okay, oh, right, why do you do that? Because you might want to compare it to, we're not going to do it in the context of this problem, but that's generally how aggregate plans get chosen. We assume that this was chosen because if you did it any other way, the total bill would be a higher number. Oh, all right. The way that I would suggest tackling it is simply listing everything that you know that they can spend money on. For instance, there was all that business about regular time, right? It says 150 per unit. So I have some scratch work here in which I added up the units. They're on the regular time row. 30,000 plus 30,000, that's 60,000, plus another 10,000, that's 70,000, right? Plus another 20,000, that's 90,000. Each one of them at that $1.50. You can check me on this. I got spending of $135,000 just on regular time. All right, how do we know when we're done? When we've looked the problem up and down and we have estimated every cost that was mentioned. Well, they also mentioned a cost for overtime. I can see at the very bottom, like of the projection screen here, the $2.50 per unit. Oh, right, and we had actually overtime already stated that they're going to produce 15,000 in overtime. So it'd be 15,000 times that 250. You can check me on this. I get a total bill for overtime of $37,500. And then the only other thing that, and you could think about it this way. Here's this scenario story. Look for the currency signs. Where are they discussing money? The only other thing that's mentioned here is the cost of holding inventory. The cost of holding inventory, they tell us that it costs us what? 50 cents per unit per month. All right. Then I just need to, inventory, add up the ending inventory through here. That's why it's specified ending inventory, right? Because these waited during this time period from here to here. The theory is that this 1,500 was delayed for a month. This 20,000, or excuse me, this 15,000 was delayed for a month. This 20,000 was delayed for a month. So if you add up those numbers, we did something similar to class in class way back when we were working on that other problem. You can check me on this. I get 30,000. Is the total bill specifically for inventory, and I can't find anything else in that problem about any other expense. So to answer that question, then you add those up. You can check me on this. For this scenario 31 in your book, I get that the total cost of that plan is $202,500. We assume that if we fiddled with it more, we wouldn't be able to lower that only because we're assuming that General Foodstuffs has fixed on the best plan for them. But at any rate, that particular plan, this is what it costs. In real life, normally, you're trying to compare this to something else. Now, this is aggregate planning. Here, the bottom end of the very last class in MGO302, I thought, well, still in Chapter 11, one thing that it pays to practice is MRP. Oh, and we had mentioned with material requirements planning, MRP problems always start out with a lot of information because there's 3 inputs to MRP, right? Quick review. You need a master production schedule. I see that. This is, if you're looking for it in the book, scenario 33. You need current inventory records, got them, and you need a bill of materials. Oh, wait a minute. For this particular problem, where's the bill of materials? Where's like the product structure diagram? You guys see it? It's actually a little stealthy. It's right here. Oh, right, because what does a product structure diagram tell you? It tells you the review parent-child relationships. They're just being reported here verbally instead of an actual diagram. Oh, part A, we can answer really, really quickly. How many levels of product structure does Dumfries item A have? It must be the review finished good because finished goods have no parents. Anytime a product structure is described to you verbally, I highly recommend sketch it for yourself. That's what I always do. Oh, all right. It says that item A has no parent item. That means I know that for a fact it must be a finished good because that's the definition. Then it says that B has A as a parent. Well, then that looks like that. And then it says that C has B as a parent. So this is what the diagram looks like. Whoops. I can draw it better here. A, B, and C. This is what this is saying. I'd much rather work with this than look at the table. Okay, because in the case of A, how many levels of product structures does Dumfries write finished good A have? Oh, the only thing also, hint that it's a finished good, the only thing that's mentioned on the master production schedule, I just count them, 1, 2, 3 levels. Using MRP methodology, how much of parts A, B, and C should be ordered, and when should they be ordered? What's another way to say that? The planned order releases. Oh, meaning that to actually answer that, I'd have to set up some records. There's only 6 planning periods in this problem. I printed this out from, remember when you're practicing MRP, that this form is still in the EQS section. It was volunteered for EQS 5, and I just set it so it didn't disappear again, because you need one record for each part. You start by entering everything that you know. Lead time is 1 week in each case. Lot size is lot for lot, 20 and 50. Current on-hand inventory, 20, 20, and 20. Okay, used up all that information. Oh, one last bit of information we started with, master production schedule. Review from MRP, any numbers on the master production schedule, they go into that item's top record, the gross requirements. That's what gets us started. So I can just copy it, 10, 0, 20, 20, 10, and 10. At the point that I've entered everything, I go to level 0. Well, that would be item A. Well, that would be this record. And I calculate the planned order releases, which is to say I fill out the rest of the record. I'd actually, for this form, I don't need these right here. All right. Well, I like to work my way across the available balance line. That's just what I like to do. So I say, all right, well, we have 20 in stock right now, and we're going to ship out 10 in the first week, and that just means that we will be down to 10 in stock by the end of that week. And then there's nothing going on in the second week. So we'll have 10 in stock going to the third week. We need to ship out 20. So I schedule to receive another 10 to make that shipment. And that is going to wipe out the available balance. Then at this point, I take advantage of the fact that if you don't have anything in inventory and the policy is lot for lot, then you can just copy whatever is required into the schedule receipts line, because that's what lot for lot means. Is whatever it is I happen to need at the moment, that is exactly how much I arrange to get. Oh, meaning that we won't accumulate any more inventory. Now, to finish out the record, this is when we want to receive it. Check the lead time. It's 1 week. These numbers, phase them forward 1 column. That's when you would want to order those amounts so that they would arrive in time. Okay, so we've filled out all the records on level 0. What do? You say the bottom line of the parent informs the top line of the child's record, but who is the child of this item A? Well, that would be B. Oh, so these numbers here go right here because it's a one-to-one situation here, unlike the yellow wheels in class. Once we're done passing parent-child, and that was it for this problem, then we fill out the record. So let's see, I've got 20 in stock. Going into the second week, need to ship out 10, meaning we'll be down to 10 in stock. Then the next week, need to use 20, only have 10. That means I need another 10. Check the lot size. Oh, well, they come in boxes of 20. Better get in another box. You have to order in multiples of that amount. Oh, meaning that we actually will kind of receive more than we need. Yeah, that's true. We'll have 10 in stock, but no problem. We'll use those the next week. That will wipe out inventory. That means that, let's see, we'll need 10 in the fifth week and be starting with nothing. Better get another box of 20. Check the lead time. Oh, meaning there'll be 10 left over here at the end of this story. Okay, this is when we want to receive it. Check the lead time to finish out the record. 1 week, phase them forward, 20 and 20. And then what? All right, well, the bottom line of the parent, in this case it's B, goes into the top line of the child's record. In this case it's C, because we're making arrangements for this to be available. All right, fill out this record. We have 20 in stock, and that's good because we'll use them in the second week. Then we have a need for 20 in the fourth week. Check the lot size. These come in boxes of 50, meaning that we'll have leftovers. And then to finish the record, phase that forward. There you go. And we have actually got our plan at this point. Remember, it's always the bottom line of the records that you are interested in according to how much should we order and when. So to answer the second part of that problem, you would just report the amounts. You know, we want to order 10 of item A in the second week and 20 in the third week and 10 in the fourth and 10 in the fifth. Here we want to order 20 of item B in the second week. So this is actually the plan, the bottom lines, how much to order and when. We said generally all of inventory management, no matter what flavor, is how much to order and when. And then I think the part C of that problem, if you're looking at it in the book, says who's got the highest inventory levels at the end. And that winds up being part C because since it has that large lot size, we had this chunk of 30 left over. That's what makes that the answer. So any questions on that? Wow. Did I stick that landing or what? It is exactly the end of class at this point. We had exactly enough time. Maybe just another 2 seconds to say that I hope you guys enjoyed the semester. I really enjoyed the semester. I know that you're studying hard for all of your exams. Okay, so good luck on that, and maybe I will see some of you in the next couple of days. Bye-bye.